So hello internet. In the last video I talked about how certain things in cars that are supposed to be innovations and things that are good are actually not that good. Technology for technology's sake isn't all it's cracked up to be. For example, think of mobile phones, smartphones. These days, the more of screen you have on the front, the better. Why? What's the point of that? Why not have a chin and a bezel above where you can put speakers and sensors and front-facing cameras, that sort of thing? There's nothing wrong with that. The idea of having the screen occupy as much area as possible, when you actually break it down, it doesn't make that much sense. When it comes to cars, it's more or less the same thing. There's so much stuff that's crammed in, you have to wonder, do we need this? Does it make my life as a driver better? Many times the answer is no. But there are times when the answer is yes, and that's what this video is about. Now I'm going to skip smaller things like, electrically operated door mirrors, they're good, or trip computers or parking sensors, as lovely as they are. More general things that really made life a lot better behind the wheel. Now, if you watched the previous video, you may have seen how I mentioned that I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was a car enthusiast. I'd collect magazines. I'd look at the numbers, this amount of displacements, cubic centimeters produce this amount of power, etc. And in the last, especially 30 years, the progress has been rather amazing. For example, my first car was a 1991 Citroën BX. And that produced 94 horsepower from a 1.6 litre naturally aspirated petrol engine. My first Citroën C5 was also a 1.6 litre engine, but it was a diesel engine. Now, traditionally, if you put diesel and petrol side by side and engines with the same displacement, the diesel is going to get a lot worse numbers than the petrol in terms of performance, though better numbers in terms of economy. When you put that 1.6 litre diesel C5 next to the only 17-year older 1.6 litre petrol BX, the numbers are amazing. The C5 produces a lot more power. Well, it is turbocharged, but either way, and it's just far more efficient. Now, you may think that's not a very apples to apples comparison because I'm comparing petrol and diesel, even though they're the same displacement, but let's compare the same displacement using the same fuel for two different generations of cars. So let's imagine, for example, the BMW E28, the 520i from 1986, 2 litre petrol engine, produced 125 brake horsepower. 30 years later, the G60 generation, again a 520i with 2 litres petrol engine, produces 184. The fuel figures, look at that, they speak for themselves. And don't forget that the older car is far lighter than the newer car, yet you get a lot more efficiency. It's just amazing. Yes, today you do have things like, mild hybrid and full hybrid and gasoline direct injection. For diesels, you've got things like common rail, but that's all part of it. That all helps make engines more efficient. Undoubtedly, a lot of this stuff was forced on automakers by emission standards. Like, for example, of this car, it's a Euro 5 compliant engine, so it has to use some tricks to make it compliant. For example, right now it's complaining that it's lacking some diesel particulate filter additive. That's a pain in the backside, but then again, I'm actually okay with that because that means I'll be, having a more efficient engine and I won't be breathing the stuff in, which is good. So anyway, yay for engine efficiency over these past 20, 30 years. It's been brilliant. Now, I might have mentioned this before, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And no one before then predicted how revolutionary the simple mobile phone was. Not even Nostradamus. One industry that was caught particularly flat-footed was the car industry, because their first attempts at making a hands-free kit, first off, it took a long time, and then when it did become part of cars, it was a bit ham-fisted. So my Volvo from the year 2000, it was an S60, it had an integrated GSM phone. So it was located in the center console and it wasn't that brilliant to use. Yes, there was a head speaker and a microphone in the headrest, and they were actually rather handy, but the actual use of the phone was a bit of a faff. You see, the SIM card was slotted into the dash, so that meant either you had to take your SIM card out of your mobile phone and slot it into the dash every time you got into the car, and then take it out of the dash every time you got out of the car, and probably you'd find yourself forgetting lots of times. Or, like me, you had 2 SIM cards and you had to keep turning off your mobile phone when you got into the car and turning on the car's mobile phone, then turning the car's mobile phone off before you got out of the car and turning your phone on. And I'd sometimes forget. It wasn't also that great because text messages would be sent to the car when the car phone was on, and the car wouldn't tell me, or it would be difficult to read because it was on a tiny screen in the corner of the instrument binnacle. Suffice to say, it wasn't brilliant. By the mid-2000s, Bluetooth had become a reality, and that really changed the game because suddenly you could get into a car without doing anything at all. Your phone would connect to your car and you could receive and make calls inside. It was brilliant. Then it became even better. You got music streaming. So files, usually MP3 files, on your phone could be played via your radio. These days, of course, we have streaming services where we basically have, well, not all the music made to man, but a good chunk of it. And it's available to us on a car journey, whether we're in Portugal or in Sweden or driving across the United States or even somewhere lost in the Australian outback, if there's reception, of course. But now this integration malarkey has gone to an even higher level with modern cars. So you're not just able to listen to what's on your mobile phone, you can also see it projected on screens using, of course, Android Auto or Apple CarPlay or something of the sort. So you've got access to navigation, you've got access to voice commands, again, your music. You can phone someone using your voice. There are a huge amount of possibilities. Of course, it's not all smooth sailing. There are touch screens, they can be dangerous, but let's leave that for all the other videos where I've mentioned it before. But yeah, this level of integration into a car would have seemed like witchcraft 15 or 20 years ago. I'm really glad that we do have this technology in the car. It's very handy. Now this next one, though not actually a revolutionary piece of technology, is rather useful. Now cruise control, I admit, has been around for a long time. I know that. But it wasn't that widespread. I had to wait until I was 29 and actually buy a car that was a bit more, how should I put this, usually out of my reach. It was a Volvo S60, so like a compact executive car. It had cruise control. It was the first time I experienced it and used it, and my God, what a massive difference it made. Because I'd usually do long distances. I remember doing like 800 kilometers in a day in my Volvo 460, and my God, that was tiring. But with cruise control, suddenly you just press a button and your right leg can rest and not be strained for hundreds of miles. It's brilliant. Then you've got active cruise control. So that's a new thing that modern cars have that is actually really, really good. Now, what is active cruise control, you may ask? Well, you set a speed, and if, for example, a lorry is in front of you, you catch up to a lorry that's going slower, the car will smoothly slow down and match the speed of the lorry until you either overtake it or it moves out of the way, it turns off the motorway or something. Then the car will smoothly and seamlessly go back up to the speed that you originally set. It's absolutely brilliant. I tried it in the Hyundai Kona that I drove in the Netherlands, and it was absolutely marvelous. Unlike, of course, that lane keeping system which I complained about in the previous video. Active cruise control is something that takes the strain off driving, but it doesn't make you lazy and complacent. It's fabulous, and to be honest, it's one of the very few things on modern cars of these driving aids that I'd actually like to have. I mean, you can keep the rest, the full self-driving stuff that Tesla's pushing now that tries to kill drivers. Couldn't care less about that. But active cruise control, that's good stuff. Now, if you love classic cars, I love classic cars, they're brilliant. There is one thing that they have that really makes a lot of difference to your life. Those are safety features. I remember back in the 80s and 90s. Oh, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I think the only safety features that cars had was the seatbelt for the front passengers and the driver's ability not to crash. And of course, dumb luck. In the case of a crash, Your best chance for survival was your relation with your deity. Now, modern cars have this a lot more sorted. You know, I get a driver's airbag, my passenger also gets an airbag. We get an airbag to either side. I get ABS, I get anti-skid control. Everyone gets a seat belts, for example. It's a completely different kettle of fish these days. And modern cars are even safer. You get things like low-speed collision avoidance that actually brakes the car for you. You get things like reverse cameras. That might not seem like a big thing, but if a child runs out into the back of the car, you can actually see them on a screen, which I think is definitely progress. And of course, now I'm a dad. I'm very glad to think that my kids in the back are a lot safer than I was back in the 80s and 90s. Because you might hear old people like my age or older saying, "Oh, we didn't need all this nannying stuff back when I was a boy." Yes, you didn't need it because you survived. A lot of us didn't. I would frolic around in the back because there were no seat belts. I'd even sit between my parents and, you know, chat to them or whatnot. But that was incredibly dangerous. And in fact, I knew it because whenever I sat in a car that had rear seat belts, I'd buckle up just for the novelty. But also deep down, I knew I was safer with that belt on. So yeah, don't go and believe what those old people say, because if they're anything like me, they would prefer to have seatbelts in the back than frolic around. It wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Thank goodness for safety, and thank goodness my kids are a lot safer. So that's it for this video. Thanks very much for watching. Next video, it will be back to form and me bad-mouthing gimmicky things in cars that are touted as fantastic new technology. Let me know in the comments below if I missed anything, if you think there's a piece of modern technology in cars that are absolutely brilliant, that make drivers' lives better. So, like, subscribe, share, etc. I hope to see you in the next video. I bid you farewell. So here's a bonus one. Think of this as a hidden track, like we had on CDs. For you kids out there, CD stands for compact disc, and it was how we heard music back in the day. Because I don't know if I've mentioned this, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So what's this newfangled modern technology that I'm talking about? Well, it's electric drivetrains, and actually it's not a modern technology at all. In fact, the electric car predates the internal combustion engine car by quite a margin. How's that for a mind-blowing fact for today? In 1899, there were more electric cabs in New York than there were internal combustion engine vehicles, if there were any at all. I'm not really sure. Doesn't matter. The thing is, electric cars today have had a resurgence. They become a lot more widespread, a lot better, and they have a lot of advantages, which I actually mentioned in a previous video, which if you've seen, you're probably going, "Ha!" Because in most of that video, I'm actually slagging off electric cars and highlighting their disadvantages, especially the ones that aren't visible right now, but will become very apparent if they do become even more widespread. But those advantages are, they're very smooth, they're quiet, they're very quick. You know, you see 4-door family saloons that are electric giving 2-door petrol hypercars a run for their money. That's pretty impressive right there. Electric vehicles are very efficient. An electric motor is 90-odd% efficient, which means around about 90% of the energy in the batteries is turned into motion. In contrast, petrol cars are like 25% efficient. So if you're paying for a litre of petrol, you're basically paying for the energy that's in there, and you're only going to use 25%. The other 75% is either turned into heat or farted out the back through the exhaust. So it's not a good deal. So just due to that fact alone, electric vehicles are also much cleaner because they make a lot better use of the energy that you pumped into them. And that energy had to actually have energy used for it to be made. So in terms of electricity, let's say you have to burn coal. In terms of petrol, you have to pump it out of some dictator's backyard, pump it onto an oil tanker which goes across the seas, which spews out disgusting diesel fumes. The diesel on a tanker is very different from the diesel in this car. That diesel doesn't have to comply with the same emissions regulations that this one does. then it gets to the port of call where it's going, it's pumped out, transported to some refinery. The refining process is incredibly energy intensive. Then when the petrol and diesel is made, it has to be pumped into a lorry, which then drives to a petrol station that is pumped into the ground, and that's where you get your petrol and diesel into your tank. What's more, it's pumped into your car electrically, which is hilarious, because if you think about one of the criticisms that people make of electric vehicles is, oh, if there's a power outage, you won't be able to refuel your electric vehicle. Well, neither will you, because you won't be able to pump petrol and diesel into your tank. So there. Anyway, just because of that, of all those steps, you can see how electricity is a lot cleaner, even if it is from a dirty source. And then it's not just that. Now that I've touched upon the oil industry, which neatly brings me on to the other big advantage that EVs have that I really like. So here I am in my diesel car. I paid a lot of money for the fuel that's in there. I don't like paying money for fuel because I'm giving a lot of it to oil companies. Now, if there were any Americans watching, which I highly doubt there are, they'd probably say, yeah, but you guys in Europe, 60% of the money you pay for fuel goes to tax. Now, I don't really mind that. If my money goes to the state and then that money is used to, I don't know, for example, upkeep the infrastructure that I use, I think that's perfectly fair. But all the rest goes to oil companies, and they are bastards. Every time there's something going on in the Middle East, oil prices go up, so do their profits, and they did absolutely nothing to warrant that extra profit. They're profiting from the misfortune of others, and I'm paying for it. So I get really annoyed, for example, when I'm stopped in traffic. I'm not moving, my engine's on, and I'm just burning my money. I'm burning the petrol that I paid for to keep the engine turning over. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have that problem with electricity. If you're sitting still in traffic, so what? Maybe if you've got the radio on and the heating and the lights, then you're using some power, but not much, especially in comparison to petrol and diesel. That's for sure. So yeah, I do think electric drivetrains have huge advantages. They do have their disadvantages. I've made a video just dedicated to that, but in general I think it's a much cleverer way of making our vehicles go. Definitely. So now it really is the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Nothing left for me to say except see you in the next video. Bye bye. If there's any other kind of modern technology that you think is absolutely brilliant that modern cars have, if the money goes to blah 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 blah, I've got another fly in. Hopefully this is recording. Anyway, anyway, there you go.